Welcome to Life Stories. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Like you're just there, quiet, unnoticed, slipping into the background of your own story while everyone else takes center stage? Imagine living in the same house for years, pouring your heart into keeping things together, only to realize one day that the people you love don't even see you anymore. That's exactly what happened to Lena. But here's the twist. What happens when a woman, forgotten by everyone, decides she's had enough? When the silence becomes too loud and the weight of invisible sacrifice finally breaks through? Stay with us as Lena's journey unfolds. A journey of rediscovery, of silence shattered, and of a mother who learned to find her voice again. It's time for her to be seen. Lena had always been the kind of woman who moved through life quietly. She was the one who folded laundry without a word, set the table with a practiced hand, and knew when to leave a room, making herself invisible as if it were her calling. Her son, Jake, and his wife, Emily, liked it that way. They preferred her silence, the way she faded into the background like the wallpaper they never noticed, the one that had been there long before they moved in. It was easy for them to forget her, to let her become a part of the house she had once called her own, before it became theirs. In the beginning, it wasn't so bad. When Jake first suggested that she move in with them after selling her old home, it felt like a generous offer. He had insisted that she shouldn't be alone, that they had more than enough room. It felt like family, at least at first. She cooked their breakfasts, made sure the house was tidy, and did everything she could to be helpful without intruding. Emily was polite, distant, a little too busy with her work and social life to offer more than the occasional thanks when Lena handed her a plate or refilled her wine glass at dinner. But time, as it always does, changed things. Months turned into years, and Lena's quiet presence, once welcomed, became expected. She was the one who cooked dinner every night, made sure the laundry was folded and put away, and kept everything in place. They never asked for her opinion anymore. Jake, who once sought her advice when making life decisions, now barely glanced up from his phone when she entered the room. Emily, on the other hand, treated her like part of the furniture, a fixture of their lives that had become too comfortable to remove. It wasn't malice, not at first. Emily didn't mean to diminish her mother-in-law, not consciously. She just didn't see Lena anymore. To Emily, Lena was nothing more than a relic from another era, a woman whose life had been measured by the invisible work she did behind the scenes, a woman who had raised her son, cooked his meals, kept his home, but never asked for anything in return. So when Emily mentioned, almost casually, how Lena had never really gone to school, and that she wasn't much of a thinker, just a doer, it felt like a punch to the gut. It wasn't the cruelty of the words, but their nonchalance. The fact that Emily hadn't even noticed how deeply that cut. She laughed it off, as if it were just another joke to entertain her friends. But Lena didn't laugh. She didn't even flinch. She stood there in the kitchen, her hand gripping the edge of the counter, as Emily's words echoed in the air. The house, once full of warmth, now felt cold, sterile, like a stage set she was no longer a part of. And in that moment, something inside Lena shifted. It was as though a door had creaked open inside her chest, revealing a part of herself she had buried deep beneath years of self-sacrifice and silence. Lena walked to her bedroom. The soft carpet beneath her feet felt like the last connection to a life she had let slip away. She opened the closet, pulled down the old box she had kept hidden for years, and dusted it off. The lid creaked as she lifted it, revealing the memories of a life she had nearly forgotten. A life where her name meant something, where her accomplishments had been acknowledged and celebrated. Inside the box were her law degree, the papers from her bar exam, and photos from a time when she had been someone else. A woman with ambition, with dreams, with a voice that demanded to be heard. Her hands trembled as she held the diploma, the gold seal still gleaming despite the years. For a moment, she just sat there, staring at it. She had once been proud of this, proud of everything she had achieved. She had worked tirelessly to build a career, to prove that she was more than just a mother, more than just a wife. And yet here she was, reduced to nothing more than the woman who cooked dinner and folded laundry. The woman who had become so invisible, even her own son barely remembered the person she used to be. Lena closed the box slowly, placing it back in the closet. But she knew, deep down, that she wasn't the same woman who had opened it. Something had changed. The silence that had filled the house for so long felt different now, heavier, like a weight she could no longer ignore. It wasn't just the years of quiet dismissal that hurt. It was the realization that she had let herself fade away, that she had allowed them to forget her. She had always been told that silence was a woman's virtue, that it was enough to be quietly useful, to stay in the background and let others shine. But now, Lena wasn't so sure. What had it cost her to stay silent all these years? What had it cost her to keep her head down and pretend that everything was fine when all along she had been drowning? That night, as she served dinner, she felt a strange calmness settle over her. Emily and Jake sat at the table, talking about their work, their plans, their lives. It was the same as it had always been. The same laughter, the same small talk, the same dismissive glances. But this time, Lena was different. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer the woman who disappeared into the corners of the room, who faded away without a trace. She had found her voice, and it was only a matter of time before she would use it. Have you ever been overlooked for something you worked so hard for, only to have someone else take credit for your efforts? When was the last time you truly remembered who you were before the world asked you to be something else? The house had never felt so small, so suffocating. Lena knew it was time to stop pretending, time to stop being the woman they thought she was. She was done playing the role they had cast for her. The truth was coming, and it would shake everything they thought they knew. It was only a matter of when. Lena woke up the next morning with a strange sense of calm. The house was quiet, too quiet. Emily had already left for work, and Jake was still asleep, his voice from the night before lingering in the stillness like an unresolved chord. The silence felt different today, deeper, more absolute. It wasn't the kind of silence that existed in comfortable companionship, but the kind that came when something was broken, when it was too late to pretend things were fine. She moved through the house as she always did, quietly, methodically, not thinking, just doing. The familiar routine of making coffee, preparing breakfast, setting the table without looking up. But this morning, each movement felt heavy, purposeful. It was as if the very act of making herself invisible had become an act of resistance, a quiet protest against the world that had boxed her in. She was done with it. It wasn't the party from last night that haunted her, not the laughter or the casual dismissal of her worth. It was the quiet, the way they all let it happen, without even thinking about it. They had all sat there, enjoying their wine and charcuterie, while she made herself invisible in the kitchen, blending into the background. She had done it for years, but last night something inside her snapped. The realization that she had become so small, so unimportant to them, was the final straw. But it wasn't just their neglect that stung. It was the way she had allowed it to happen. Lena, the woman who had once fought for everything, who had earned every inch of respect, had become a shadow in her own home. She had fought for a career, for a place at the table, for recognition. And now she had allowed herself to fade into the walls, into the furniture. She had let her son and his wife forget who she was, what she had achieved. The pain of that realization hit her like a tidal wave. She walked into the kitchen, the warmth from the stove radiating against her skin, but it did nothing to soothe the cold that had settled deep inside her. Her hands trembled as she reached for the coffee pot. She had once been someone with fire in her eyes, someone who stood up for herself, who demanded respect. And now? Now she was just a woman who cooked and cleaned, who faded into the background, who stayed silent to keep the peace. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Jake, standing there in the hallway with a look in his eyes that made her stomach twist. He hadn't spoken to her all morning, hadn't even acknowledged the weight of what had happened the night before. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice quieter than usual. Lena's heart skipped a beat, but she said nothing. She simply nodded, stepping aside to let him in. They sat down at the kitchen table, the space between them thick with unspoken words. Jake fidgeted with his coffee cup, his eyes avoiding hers. He was like a man walking through a minefield, unsure of where to step, scared of what might explode if he said the wrong thing. I know what happened last night," he said finally, his voice breaking slightly. "Emily didn't mean it, you know? She just didn't think." Lena looked at him, the hurt in her chest growing. She didn't think. It was always the same excuse, wasn't it? She didn't think. But the problem wasn't that Emily didn't think. It was that Emily never had to. It was always Lena who thought, who made sure everything was in place, who kept everything running smoothly. "I'm not upset with you, Jake," Lena said softly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I'm upset with myself." Jake looked up at her then, his eyes filled with confusion. "What do you mean?" "I let it happen," Lena whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I let myself fade into the background. I let you both forget who I was, who I am. And that's on me." Jake sat there, stunned, his mouth opening and closing as if he were struggling to find the right words. Lena could see the conflict in his eyes, the guilt eating at him, but also the helplessness. He wanted to fix it, to make things right, but he didn't know how. "I never meant for you to feel this way," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you never asked, Jake," Lena replied, her voice shaking now. "You never asked. You never asked who I was before you needed me, before I became someone's mother, someone's wife. I wasn't always like this. I was a lawyer once. I was someone." Jake stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the window, staring out at the backyard, his back to her. Lena watched him, her heart heavy with something she couldn't quite name. Was it disappointment? Regret? Or was it just the painful truth that things would never be the same again? "I didn't know," Jake said after a long pause. "I didn't know what you gave up. I never even thought about it." "And that's exactly the problem," Lena said, her voice tight. "You never thought about it." Jake turned then, his face etched with guilt. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice raw. "I don't know how to fix this." Lena felt the tears welling in her eyes, but she fought them back. She had cried enough. She wasn't going to cry now. "You can't fix it, Jake," she said, her voice firm. "You can't fix something that's been broken for so long." The room was silent for a long time after that. The only sound the distant hum of the refrigerator and the soft tick of the clock on the wall. Lena stared at her son, seeing him as if for the first time. He was the man he was because of her, because of everything she had given him. And now he was looking at her as if she were a stranger, a woman he didn't understand. "I need to go," Jake finally said, his voice low. He didn't wait for her to respond. He just walked out the door, leaving Lena alone in the kitchen, the weight of everything pressing down on her. "Do you think it's possible to reclaim yourself after years of living for others? What would you do if the people you loved the most suddenly saw you for who you really are, not who they've made you out to be?" Lena sat back in her chair, the silence stretching out before her like an endless road. She had always tried to be the one who held everything together, but now she realized she couldn't fix it. She couldn't fix anything. The only thing she could do now was walk away. And for the first time in a long time, the idea of leaving felt like freedom. The question was, how long could she stay in this house that had never truly been hers, and what would she do next? Lena stood at the threshold of the house she had called home for so many years, the familiar walls now feeling more like a prison than a sanctuary. The air was still, thick with the weight of unspoken words and unresolved tension. The echo of Jake's footsteps, leaving for work, still lingered in the quiet. There was no more pretense between them, no more false smiles, no more delicate silence. She had always believed in the value of family, in the power of love and sacrifice. But now, standing here in the kitchen where she had spent countless hours cooking, cleaning, and serving, Lena realized that she had lost herself somewhere along the way. She had given so much of herself to keep the family intact, to keep everything running smoothly, that she had forgotten to live for herself. The night before, as she watched Jake walk out of the door, Lena had made a decision. It wasn't one made in anger or spite or frustration. It was made in the quiet stillness that had settled in her soul, a stillness that had allowed her to hear her own voice for the first time in years. The truth was, she couldn't keep living like this. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when all along, her own happiness had been buried beneath the weight of others' expectations. But the hardest part wasn't leaving. It was the part where she had to admit to herself that she wasn't just leaving her son and daughter-in-law behind. She was leaving behind the woman she had become. Small, invisible, silent. Lena had spent so many years trying to fit into a life that wasn't truly hers that she had lost sight of who she really was. She had to reclaim herself, even if it meant walking away from the life she had built. She grabbed her purse and walked into the living room. There was no final confrontation, no dramatic exchange. She wasn't interested in that anymore. She didn't need to explain herself. She had made her choice, and that was enough. Jake hadn't been home when she left. She hadn't wanted to say goodbye. The thought of it, the tears, the words, felt unnecessary. The silence between them was louder than anything they could have said. As Lena opened the door and stepped outside, the weight of the house, the years of silence and sacrifice, lifted from her shoulders. She had made it. She was free. The world outside was different. The sun, a soft golden hue on the horizon, cast its warmth on the streets as she walked through her neighborhood. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lena felt the air fill her lungs, not with the heaviness of duty or obligation, but with the lightness of possibility. She had a small apartment now, near the lake. It was nothing grand, but it was hers. The windows were big, the light poured in freely, and it smelled like new beginnings. It was a quiet place, the kind of place where she could finally breathe, finally rest. She spent her first evening there with a cup of tea, staring out at the water as the sun set behind the trees. It was peaceful, beautiful, and for the first time in a long while, Lena felt at home. But as she sat there, she couldn't help but think of Jake. She wondered if he would ever understand. Would he ever look back and see the woman she had been? The woman who had fought so hard, not just for him, but for herself? The woman who had sacrificed everything to make sure they were happy, only to be forgotten? The thought of him, lost and confused, stirred something in her chest. There was love there. There always would be. Lena spent the next few days settling into her new life. She unpacked her things slowly, one box at a time, savoring the process of making the space truly hers. She went to the local library, spent hours reading, and even started writing in her journal again. She walked along the lake in the mornings, the sound of the water soothing her soul. It was a life she had never known she needed. A life of quiet moments, of reflection, of space to just be. But then one afternoon, as she was walking back from the market, she saw him. Jake, standing across the street, watching her with a look in his eyes that she couldn't quite decipher. She stopped. He hesitated for a moment before crossing the street to meet her. The distance between them felt like a canyon, but neither of them moved. "I didn't know where you went," Jake said, his voice low, unsure. I couldn't let you leave without saying something." Lena looked at him, her heart aching. He was standing there, so much like the boy she had raised, yet so different. She hadn't expected him to come. She hadn't expected him to understand so soon. "I'm not angry, Jake," she said softly. "I just needed to find my way back to myself. I had lost her, and I needed to remember who I was before I could be anything else for anyone else." Jake's eyes softened. "I never saw you that way," he murmured. I never realized how much you gave up, how much you've done for us." Lena didn't know what to say. The weight of those years, the silent sacrifices, the invisible wounds, they couldn't be healed in a single moment, no matter how much she wished they could. "I don't expect you to," Lena said, her voice trembling slightly. But I needed you to see me. Not as the woman who takes care of everything, but as the woman who once had dreams of her own. There was a long pause, the weight of everything hanging between them. Then Jake stepped closer, holding out a small package. I I found this at the house, he said, his voice thick. It's yours. Lena took the package, her hands shaking. She opened it slowly, her breath catching in her throat. Inside was the photo from years ago. The photo of her on the day she passed the bar exam, arms raised in triumph. The photo that had been tucked away in the box she had kept hidden for so long. The photo of the woman she had been before everything else took over. I remember this day, Jake said quietly, his voice soft. I remember how proud I was of you. Lena smiled, tears welling in her eyes. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words until now. Thank you, she whispered. Jake nodded, his face filled with a mix of guilt and understanding. He had said nothing else, but his presence spoke volumes. The silence between them felt different now. It was not filled with unspoken anger or resentment, but with something else, something new, something that held the possibility of healing. As Lena walked back to her apartment that evening, she felt lighter than she had in years. She had made her peace, not just with the world around her, but with herself. She had fought for her place in the world, and now she was ready to live in it, fully and without apology. What did you think of Lena's journey to reclaim herself? Did her decision to leave and find peace resonate with you? If you enjoyed this story, comment 100 below to let me know. Where are you watching from? I'd love to hear which country or city you're tuning in from. Don't forget to share this story with your friends. Thank you for watching and supporting Life Stories.